Good morning. I'm Marilyn Reizbaum. I'm a longstanding member of the English department at Bowdoin and currently also director of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies program, a program to which I've also had a longstanding commitment. Welcome to this panel, everybody. I look forward with Bowdoin women leaders, mastering adaptability. I'm delighted to be here today, however virtually, as part of these kickoff events celebrating this milestone of 50 years of women at Bowdoin. I have had the honor to be part of a few of the markers of coeducation over the last years, but 50 seems a real corner turned. To wit, the Bowdoin women leaders who are part of this panel, which I am privileged to be moderating. Our topic today is twofold, though there will be some reflection on the past and how the panelists arrived at their current positions. The aim here is to take stock for the future, to examine the strategies for growth and achievement that make leaders. Adaptability is a key word here, especially when we think of the gendering of leadership roles. We will hear how these Bowdoin women navigate the changing landscape in their work life and lives to forge their remarkable careers. If we have time, we would be happy to take questions, and we ask you to pose those questions using the Q&A feature. Let me now introduce the panelists in no particular order. My introductions will be brief, giving the panelists the opportunity to fill in the blanks, including their major areas of study at Bowdoin. At the conclusion of our panel, we will be joined briefly by President Clayton Rose. Mai Le Libman, Bowdoin alumna 2000, is the CEO and co-founder of a medical device startup, Haystack DX, that is developing a diagnostic device to improve the assessment of nerve and muscle diseases such as ALS. Before coming to the startup world, she was in the federal government, the Social Security Administration, international organizations, World Bank and United Nations Development Program, and nonprofit consulting, the Urban League, Viet Aid. Just this year, she published Worlds Apart, My Personal Life Through Transcultural Poverty, Privilege, and Passion. She writes, "My most important job is being a mom to 3 kids, though they may think my other jobs take priority." Emily Hubbard, 07, lives in Washington, D.C., where she practices labor and employment law and has developed a national security law expertise. She is currently an assistant director at the Department of Justice and adjunct professor at Georgetown Law. On her way to her current position, after graduating from Bowdoin and attending Boston College Law School, she worked in the Boston Public Schools as labor counsel and then moved to DC to accept a job in the Environmental Protection Agency. At the EPA, she notably drafted the agency's first transgender and gender nonconforming policy. After leaving the EPA, she joined the Director of National Intelligence, where she joined the Director of National Intelligence, where she litigated employment matters, but also gained broad national security experience. In her message to me about her bio, she added, "I'm a wife and mom to a baby girl born in 2020. Charlotte Carnevale Willner, 06, has been working in online trust and safety for 15 years, first at Facebook, then at Pinterest. Last December, she was asked to serve as executive director at the Trust and Safety Professional Association, which supports the global community of professionals who develop and enforce principles and policies that define acceptable behavior and content online. She describes her first job as customer service at Facebook, then a startup. She took it intending to save up to go to graduate. Raquel Santizo, 2019, lives in San Francisco and works as a growth specialist at Air House, a tech startup that was founded by a Bowdoin alumna, Sarah Seawack. This position is a result of a career transition from politics to tech marketing. Prior, she was at a political consulting firm, and before that, she was an organizer for Kamala Harris's presidential campaign in Iowa. Laurie Hawkes, 77, is from Waterville, Maine. She is an active real estate investor and venture capitalist, and is chairman of the board of directors of Broadstone Net Lease, Inc. After Bowdoin, Laurie earned an MBA from Cornell. She's had several executive leadership positions in the business world, for example, as an investment banker with Salomon Brothers, Inc. and CS First Boston. She writes, I have a growing number of charities, causes, institutions that I'm committed to, including Bowdoin and Maine. Laurie's service to Bowdoin is extraordinary. She was the first female senior class president and first female recipient of the Alumni Service Award. She served as class agent for 10 years, the Alumni Council for 4 years, including president in 1984 to 1985, and joined the Board of Overseers in 1986. Laurie became the first female Bowdoin graduate to join the Board of Trustees in 1995, when she served until 2008, which she served until 2008. Laurie has served as her class gifts chair for each class reunion and capital campaign number post-graduation. Laurie was active in career counseling, including contributing capital gifts to the career counseling department and recruiting 18 Bowdoin graduates to Salomon Brothers. Now, perhaps we could begin with each of you addressing several of the questions, but maybe the first, most importantly, what is the connection between your career at Bowdoin and the work you are now doing? And how would have been the shifts in your career? What have they been like? And maybe we could start with you, Emily, if you don't mind.
Sure. Thank you for that introduction, Marilyn. So I guess I should just start by sort of saying what my definition of adaptability is, because it has changed so much over time. I think, especially as a Black woman, I always viewed adaptability as really akin to assimilation. You go into a place, you learn how it functions, you sort of blend into that majority culture, and that is the key to success. And what it ends up doing is you just create all of these boxes, really small boxes that you put yourself in, when in fact, what I've now learned, I guess, oh my God, am I 15 years past Bowdoin? Yeah, 15 years later, is that the purpose of adaptability is really to broaden your opportunities, to make your lens and your experiences greater so that you can go anywhere and you can see yourself anywhere. And, you know, as women, we don't have the same, I think, sort of inherent confidence that we belong in every single space. But what I've learned and what I've grown in is I'm very confident in my vision for my life. And that's something I think that grows over time. And it doesn't come without challenges, because often something that I've experienced, and I think most women of color can attest to, is what we call imposter syndrome, which is you are fantastic, you are qualified, and you still feel like, I do not belong here. I don't know why I'm in this role. And that, you know, is not just a feeling or a notion, it's a notion that's very much stems from facts, which are, you know, bias that exists in the workplace, structural racism, structural sexism. And so, you know, we're going into a place where we know that we're not necessarily going to be treated the same or expected to be the same. Because one thing I can sort of provide, having been an employment litigator for 10 years, is I've litigated a lot of cases involving performance issues, you know, where an individual says, I didn't receive a bonus, I received a negative performance evaluation because of my race, because of my sex. And what is so striking to me after all this time are really sort of the top attributes that are given to women versus men, particularly white men. Women are always noted as being good workers. And we are also always noted as being good at what we do, both of which are incredibly limiting because good at what you do is just that. And a worker is just that. Whereas men are always, and I mean, I've seen this case after case, they're sort of described as I could see him leading this office. I think he has great leadership potential. I think he would be good to take over. He just needs to do X, Y, and Z. So that perspective puts us in a place where I really do think everything has to come from your center. Like, this is what I want for my vision. And more importantly, who's going to be your best advocate? And that can only be you. So what I've tried to do, I think particularly in the last 5 years, I feel like I've come into my own with respect to, I appreciate your advice, but maybe not going to do that. Or that sounds nice, but it's limiting. And when people tell me things are far-fetched, I think, okay, but let's run with it and see. Because I feel like the purpose of adaptability is just to make a life for yourself that is very flexible and that is open to all of these spaces. So switching gears to how I've applied that, to my specific career, as you mentioned, I started with Boston Public Schools as a litigator, which was a great position because it was a small office. I had no idea what I was doing. The people around me didn't have time to teach me. So I would just pick up treatises and read them cover to cover. And what it did was it put me in a position where I had a lot more litigation experience than people at my level, even though they, may have had more prestigious positions with big law firms, big companies. And then I transitioned to EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, which was also a great opportunity with a small team and allowed me to do a lot of first chair litigation. And I had the opportunity to work on a lot of policies, the most notable one being the transgender and non-gender conforming policy, which was the first that EPA had ever created, and one of the first in the federal government. So that put me in a position where I said to myself, how does this work? And while most people seem to be focused on it doesn't work, I thought, well, if I can figure out what do we do with someone's record after a name change, how do we give them, a new PIV card? What does that even look like? By being more solution oriented, I found myself in a really good place. And from there, I moved to the Director of National Intelligence, which everyone said was absolutely crazy because they said I'd basically be transitioning myself to an intelligence community career, even though I was still doing employment litigation. But I actually ended up broadening my portfolio in this really weird way. And people say, well, how did you come up with that? I think it's because being so dedicated to employment law, I asked myself, how are all of these national security matters being considered without any consideration for the inherent bias that exists in a lot of the decisions and adjudications that are made? And so fortunately, and I think very excitedly, I was able to combine national security and employment. And now I actually teach a class at Georgetown called The Intersection of National Security and Employment Law, which I think students are very intrigued by. But all of this is really coming from Emily saying, I think I can do this. And just really sort of talking to my husband and looking at my daughter and thinking, I see people around me who are doing things that you don't necessarily think they would be equipped for based on their resume or their background, but just putting myself out there. And I definitely want to give a note about Bowdoin if I could. I don't know if I've talked too long. Okay. Because I had a tremendous experience at Bowdoin. I think Bowdoin obviously has its shortcomings. It's hard for Bowdoin to prepare a Black woman to be adaptable in the workspace when it's predominantly white and very affluent. But what Bowdoin does so well is it nurtures you as a person. And so what Bowdoin always taught me is everyone here is great and you can do whatever it is you want to do. And so what we encourage you to do is to do everything. And so I think that's the beauty of Bowdoin is, do you want to do cross-country skiing? It seems small, but in the realm of your life, I think it's very helpful to help you get out of your box and understand that it's just an experience, right? Like you don't have to be afraid of an experience. And secondly, and I think just as important, is the modeling that I saw in so many women at Bowdoin that were just phenomenal. I had some professors, for example, I'm just going to shout some people out because I think they deserve it. I had Catherine Dosh Roth as a French professor, and she was incredible. I mean, up early, up late, it all mattered to her in a way that made me feel like this is important and I need to take it seriously. Madame Vete Congolo was an amazing professor. I had amazing women in res life, but I say all that to say, even they, first of all, I think they walk into the room and you feel like this person is confident and knows who they are. But even through the years, I've seen them transition in ways that were sort of unexpected. I've seen people go from administrative jobs at Bowdoin to law school or, you know, to a private company and been surprised by that transition. But I think that modeling from Bowdoin has been particularly effective and certainly a touchstone that I keep in the back of my mind, you know, as I move throughout my life, even though the college gets further in the rear view.
Emily, thank you. Yes.
I love to touch on what Emily said about Bowdoin. So my career was a zigzag. If you look on my resume, no one would hire me. It's all over the place. You mentioned that, you know, I was in the federal government. I was in international organizations. I did nonprofit. I did everything and anything that I was passionate about. And my studies at Bowdoin has no direct impact on what I'm doing today, or at least on paper. But it was very relevant in my first 5 to 8 years. However, everything I studied at Bowdoin and everything I did at Bowdoin is highly relevant to what I do now. As the CEO of a startup running a global team from Israel to India to the US with scientists with different behaviors, being able to manage that is so important. And so there are a couple of things why Bowdoin helped me. One, the writing. I came in not knowing how to write. And there are requirements that you have to take writing courses, and that forced me into a new environment. And I felt like it was hell for a long time, like trying to write these papers, getting C's and D's on them. And like, oh my God, am I ever going to make it out of Bowdoin with this? And only through those failures was I able to kind of overcome that. Now I'm writing so much. I write on a daily basis. I write grants, I write books. I'm writing a script right now. And so that has helped me, and being able to write, to communicate to people of different culture and communication style to help them navigate and do what you want to do, for example. So that's one. The other is the social construct that Emily was talking about. We can't adopt and change and pursue our passion as women if we don't have men who also have that same thinking. Being able to, like Bowdoin put me in a situation where I had to adopt and learn this whole new environment. If I went to a different school, I would have just probably stuck with the Asian crowd, or stuck with, or go back to my immigrant enclave, for example. But Bowdoin forced me to kind of break out of that and kind of start interacting with people who are different from me. Because in the real world, everyone's different. And also similarly for the men, they also taught them, hey, women are important too. You better start, be behind them, be their allies, not just women, but BIPOCs and different, whatever your, gender, your race, culture, religion. And that's what Bowdoin, you might not see it because it's intangible, but looking back and in retrospect, all the people who have helped me were Bowdoin men from my husband, who has allowed me to do whatever I want. If I want to write a book, if I want to write a script, if I want to take on more startups, giving up all our salaries to live in poverty or check, paycheck to paycheck just to pursue our passion and dream. You can't do that on our own in this society. We have to change people's mindsets. So those are the things that I feel that Bowdoin has been able to give me to allow me to adopt.
Thank you so much, Mai Le. Charlotte, can I turn to you?
I'm so glad, Miley, that you brought up the C's and D's, because I can talk about that in my Bowdoin experience as well. I loved the way, Emily, you were talking about adaptability and thinking about it as like experiences, and you don't have to be scared of an experience, because, when I look, like I actually did a Q&A with some students the other day, just about, being a woman in technology. And when they read my bio, every time I go to one of these sessions, it's like, oh, well, Charlotte, she was like first safety manager at Facebook, first safety manager at Pinterest. She's working on online trust and safety. It's all these incredibly important societal issues. I now am executive director of this 15,000 person professional association. I don't know what I'm doing, right? I've never felt like I know what's happening here. And for a long time, I felt like my progress was extremely accidental, or like, oh my gosh, someone's going to find out at some point that like, I don't know what to do here. And I think it's exactly that, is sort of like thinking in your mind about, okay, rather than, it's that you don't know what you're doing. It's maybe that actually no one knows what they're doing. And understanding that every sort of choice you make, or every decision you sort of decide to make on the way, gets you to the next step in whatever your career, your path is going to be. For Bowdoin, I loved my Bowdoin experience, and I was on academic probation my sophomore year because I could not get myself together. Turns out I had undiagnosed ADHD, which, that's going to impact your academics, but I didn't know. And so I think, I was able to figure it out clearly, because I did graduate and I'm grateful, but it just did not feel like a guarantee for me to have anything like a successful career, much less the successful career that I've had. And when I look back, I really didn't make any choices that were like, oh, I am intentionally going to do X, Y, and Z, and that's going to be the thing for me. But I'd had these experiences at Bowdoin that really prepared me to be ready to have that sort of additional responsibility, or that next step. I started working at Facebook because I needed a job to make any money to go back to grad school, as you mentioned, Marilyn. Didn't do that. Glad I didn't, for many reasons, actually. But I ended up progressing at Facebook. I felt very accidentally. And it's because I knew that the Isle of Man was not one of the Channel Islands. And I only knew that really because I'd been doing a lot of reading at Bowdoin. And that was essential information at the time, because we were all network based. And so you had to know those sorts of things. I ended up being Facebook's first manager of international support because I took a little German at Bowdoin. I spoke French going into Bowdoin, and I was like, yeah, German, why not, right? Apparently that qualified you in those days to manage the entire international support strategy. And okay, I could step up and I could take that when it became available, because I happened to, I guess, have this experience, right? I ended up going into, sort of site integrity issues because I had like volunteered for a baby names website. And so I knew what looked like a real name, globally versus everybody else. It was all these sort of accidental choices that I'd made that, if you spin it around and you think about it, not as like, oh, you happen to maybe be scraping by here, but actually you've connected with people in your life who are able to equip you for this, right? You've connected with knowledge in your life that equips you for that next step, and sort of leaning into that as possibility rather than as dread has been a huge part of, the adaptability that I really did have to learn at Bowdoin. And I'm very proud to be carrying forward from Bowdoin. I think that fundamentally on paper, a lot of us probably didn't expect to be where we are today. And everybody, especially if you're a young person listening to this right now, like, yeah, on paper, you might not either, but like you find your way, you can.
Yeah, and I'd love to chime in here now. First of all, Emily, I think a nugget that you said that's so important, that I actually said yesterday to a Bowdoin student who asked me for advice, was just like, no one's gonna have your back like you, and I just think that is key to remember. And, the word selfish has a very negative connotation, but I think in the space of being women professionals, you have to be selfish. You have to really prioritize you. in whatever capacity that means, whether it means leaving a job that isn't treating you as well, isn't valuing you, isn't really setting up that growth potential for your career long-term. And that's actually what I ended up doing. So backing up, I was a neuroscience major, gender and women's studies minor, totally thought I was gonna go to med school, figured out that that wasn't for me, and then thought I was gonna go to research, strongly dislike research, nothing wrong with it, but it wasn't for me also. And so by the time it was my sophomore year, I was like, oh my goodness, what in the world am I gonna do? I've always been this, person in STEM, like that was going to be my whole thing. And thankfully I took a risk and I just started interning at a nonprofit. I was like, let's see where this is gonna go. That led me to being a digital intern for Gavin Newsom's gubernatorial campaign in 2018, which led me to Iowa post-graduation, which then led me to a political consulting firm. And, I think as a lot of young professionals think, they think like, this is it, I'm here, like I'll probably stay here for a while, or I don't want to leave, it's going to look bad if I'm not here for at least a year or two. What is that going to say to future employers? And I knew in that role again that I was not going to be challenged. And I just think you need to leave when you're not somewhere that wants to foster your growth and learning. So that's what I did. And it was really risky. It was May of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. I'm a class of 2019 grad. I had no idea how it was going to go. And thankfully it worked out. I had the great joy of speaking with like 50 people, networking over 2 months, and it was really stressful. But now I'm at a tech startup and I'm in B2B marketing, something that I would have never expected to say. And, everyone that I speak to who knows me kind of chuckles and I laugh even when I say, I'm like, yeah, I didn't expect this either. But I think that again goes back to something Emily said. It's like, it's not about putting yourself in a box and packaging yourself. It's more of like, lay everything out on the table. What can I do? What are my strengths? What are my passions? And how do I, in a sense, mold that so that other people understand that I can do this and I am qualified and I will be great at it. And, I'm an asset. And I think that's really the main thing, like your confidence and really having your own back. And I think something else that I've heard is taking risks. Like I would have never gone into nonprofits if I didn't realize that I didn't like STEM. And it's important to know what you don't like to get to where you'll be somewhere that you do enjoy and is a better fit.
Thank you, Raquel. Laurie.
I would do it all over again. There's been so many comments that have been made by these younger women. But I will say that my path, much like Maya, was hardly linear. And I think if you think back to then, it was quite a few years ago. That's the best part of the best advice I can give you is don't think that what you've studied is going to define you going forward. It's really, have you developed the skills and have you been empowered to think out of the box? Have you been encouraged to take risks? Have you been coached to be collaborative? Interesting, the comments about mentoring too. We didn't have the choice to have grand female professors when we were there because there were none. And so I choose to define who I look to as a mentor. It can be male, it can be female. The issue is, do they believe in me as much as I believe in me, and at times even more so? They're the ones who are going to push you. They will be the ones to see what you are capable of doing. And finding those gems and special people in your life are who you should not only look for early on, sometimes you may not even recognize them early on, but keep them close, because we're talking about Bowdoin as a one-shot deal you went through when we were all 18 to 22, 23 years old. But my experience with Bowdoin has been ongoing. And I don't mean just the college itself, it's everybody that I met along the way. It's an extraordinary network of people who we had shared experiences. Some of them were quite different, but they were shared experiences. And I find that having been at school, not only my friends, but all the faculty and mentors that were there at the time, and they were extraordinarily supportive. I've mentioned it, I think, at one of our last sessions, but we only had 90 women on campus when we got there and 1,100 men. So there was no shot that you would find a plethora of women to gather with. And in fact, many of the early women, I know there's some on the phone right now, we were very disparate. We had different interests. We had, I mean, when they first chose who they were going to admit for early women classes, they really took a vast spread of skills and interests, etc. So you would find your friendships and hold them dear. But frankly, I found that over time, having a chance to meet other alums and across decades, and that includes the experiences, you know, at the Alumni Council and the boards and all the other organizations, the Alumni Fund, as well as when there's no one on this Zoom who doesn't realize when they meet a Bowdoin person, doesn't matter if it's in New York or Cameroon, there's going to be this incredible connectivity. And there isn't anything that I wouldn't do for a Bowdoin person if asked, and particularly as they develop their careers. But I would never have defined, I started out as pre-med, hell-bent that I was going to go into medical school, went away my junior year to the University of Nairobi and became enamored with Agency for International Development, came back, decided that's what I was going to do, went to Cornell to save the world. And somewhere along the way, at the end, I got vacuumed into the capitalist world at Salomon Brothers because it was so extraordinary. I had never even envisioned myself in that capacity, but it was so incredibly exciting that people were brilliant. They were driving the markets. They were real players. But then moving to private equity after 15 years in investment banking was a whole new experience. And the last one was when I thought I was pseudo-retired in 2007. We ended up starting a single family rental housing company. And it started out as a lark. It was only going to be the first 30 houses. Then it grew to 600 houses. And then eventually we formed a REIT and owned over 10,000 houses and took it public. None of those would have been on my radar when I first graduated from Bowdoin. But the ability to have critical thinking, to have people empower me and say, you can do anything you want to be. And I think one of the biggest issues that's been mentioned by everybody on this today is that pushing yourself, you have to be your own best advocate. Women have not done as anywhere near the job that men do. And you won't get what you don't ask for. And that doesn't mean you are selfish. That means you are aware of your self-worth, and you need to ask every single time you're in a position, whether it's profit, nonprofit, public, private. But I find that women do, as mentioned earlier, get great credit for being incredible workers. Their work ethic is off the charts. But that is not what gets you to the leadership position. It is one where I think you can more often not get taken advantage of because you'll work those long hours. And if you make a mistake, women own up to it. I hate to say it to all the men on the phone, but they're the first to admit it. And I think sometimes you just have to say, yes, you could have done a better job, but so could the male associate sitting next to you. And you really have to sing your own praises at times. And for whatever reason, it's been difficult genetically for us to get there. You have to get there. And I think that's an enormous part of where, when we first started Bowdoin, no one told me we couldn't. And it was a very small group of women, but I'd say that at least the women I keep in close touch with have done extremely well in their lives. And I think there's some grounding there. And there's always a return. If you want to go back, you're going to have the supporters. And that's why you're all on the Zoom today. It does matter. So I would say in a nutshell, it doesn't stop. It's one that I still think I have another good 3 or 4 decades. That might be pushing it a bit. But we expect that we can continue to make the organization and institution better and benefit from those who have come out of it, even more recently. I'll stop there. I have other comments, but we'll wait.
Thank you, everybody. Just to follow up on a couple of things. I was struck that we already have a question, and the person who asked the question commented on your expression, Charlotte, of accidental choices. And I wanted, some of you have mentioned what you majored in at Bowdoin, and the sort of the shift, the change that has taken place from that moment to the Raquel in particular, which is, and I think very often, especially when, you know, younger students, younger women are talking to us, to you, they're interested in that idea. What you first thought you were going to do, and then how that evolved or didn't, and the accidental choices. And I think also you said very interestingly, all of you, in a variety of ways, how you were going to use some of the resources you did get to develop those interests and to feel confident that you could do it. I wondered if the rest of you who didn't actually mention what your majors were at Bowdoin could say something about the connection or disconnection between what you thought you were going to do at Bowdoin and what you ended up doing, if that would be okay with you. Yeah.
Marilyn, I can say something about that.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I came into Bowdoin thinking I was going to be a scientist. Math and science was just really easy for me. Having some challenges at Bowdoin at that time, I dropped my science, and I also discovered some new interests in international relations and French. So I ended up graduating with a government and French degree and a minor in econ that allowed me to go into international relations, international organizations, and the federal government. But family, life, you know, falling in love, I kind of gave all that up and kind of moved back to Boston and did something and stumbled on things that I never imagined I would do, like startups. And now I'm back in science. I'm leading a medical device company, managing scientists and doctors. And I didn't imagine that. That was really accidental, actually. It just happened that my neighbor saw that I was kind of free. I just had a baby. Maybe I would take interest in being his partner. So things just kind of evolve, and it's just, I kind of used all the skill sets I've had to kind of work. But a lot of it is because I was just so interested, and I was willing to work that 150% to learn and get up to speed. But it wasn't easy. And it's only possible if, you know, there's people who believe in you, and mostly you have to believe in yourself.
You know, Marilyn, if I could add to that, I think the real, a term that applies is being opportunistic. And I think as we came through the systems, the notion that you had to move in lockstep through either a career or a pattern that actually made some sense to other people looking from the outside in. And I do think it boils down to, you have to be open-minded that if an opportunity presents itself, whether we call it accidental or not, combination of skills, luck, and having the good fortune to see it as an opportunity and capitalizing on that, whether you aren't sure when you jump off the dock that you can swim in that current. But I find more often than not, if you do jump, you will swim. And I think that applies, having had the experiences at Bowdoin, but it is a matter of saying, I'm willing to take that chance, and knowing that when you see it, it may defy what people thought you should do and what they expected you to do. But if you believe that you can do it, and it's not just an altruistic comment, it's the fact that I've seen it happen to so many different people who did step out of the lines, stop coloring between the lines. And you'll find that everyone on this Zoom, I think, actually did something that no one could have predicted when they graduated in their senior years. And I think that is the opportunism. It's the skill sets you have. And I think it's the social skills. It's the ability to problem solve. And I think that most of what I've done where it was particularly difficult, it's the ability to get from point A to Z. You don't have to go in a straight line. You have to go around that wall, under the wall, through the wall, or over the wall. And as long as you do that, you'll get to the goal line. And I think it matters. And I think people who have to do it in a much more systematic way will be less successful.
And I'd love to just add to that. I was an English major at Bowdoin and a very enthusiastic art history minor, because I read an article, I think my second semester of junior year, about Interpol agents who do art and artifact repatriation. And I was like, that's it. That's what I'm going to do. Art and artifact repatriation. So I hurried up to do as much art history as I possibly could in my final year at Bowdoin. And I was like, this is it. And turns out there's like not a lot of jobs available in that field, especially if you're graduating into a global recession. And so I was sort of biding my time, thinking how I was going to get back into like artifact repatriation, my dream job, incidentally, still my dream job, be amazing. But it really, you know, in sort of pursuing that or sort of thinking through that path, I had the opportunity, because there was not a lot of availability in that field, to really think through what is it about that really appeals to me, and how can I, you know, first I was thinking about how can I prepare for that in the options I do have available to me. So, you know, when you look at my path, for example, at Facebook early on, I did start in customer service. I did start, you know, sort of with international support, but I pivoted into what ultimately became online trust and safety. And it was very much for me because I thought, well, maybe I'll get to learn more about investigations, right? And that's something you're going to need to know if you're doing art and artifact repatriation. And that's true. But what I ended up realizing is that the thing that I really liked, I mean, yes, like the you know, sort of the cultural heritage issues are very important and very interesting. But there are all these other sort of injustices out there that are expressed in various types of you know, whether it's crimes or just things that should be crimes online, and you can get a lot of that same, you can really get a lot of that same activity in pursuing a parallel career, or even a very different looking career.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, that's again, going back to adaptability, it's really about taking that moment or taking even years to understand what is it about what interests you that you can find in sort of any position you're in, and sort of how are you opportunistic with it? How do you maximize that?
And just to add to that, I think our generation, meaning sort of my generation, has done a good job of recognizing our worth in some ways. You know, I think our parents' generation, for better or worse, oftentimes would stay with a company a long time. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? And that was culturally sort of the norm. But now thinking about, you know, I like your phrase, Charlotte, about the accidental choices, because I always like to say, you don't have to go up every rung on the career ladder. Like some of the rungs, you just need to skip them. I'm not going to go 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Like that's too slow. But I think it's so great that people in our generation recognize their worth enough to say, and I think Raquel, you mentioned this too, if I'm not getting what I need where I am, it's absolutely important to advocate for what those needs are. But at some point when you hit an impasse, you have to just say, I need to move on to the next opportunity so that I can see my vision out. And so I think it's really great that so many of us are not just sitting and sort of staying still, rather looking for, okay, I'm not sort of upset about this particular place that I'm in. I'm not, you know, resentful of it. I'm just being open-minded now, and I'm being open to the possibilities that exist. And I think that's something that clearly the women on this panel have done, but to the extent there are people that are watching us that are younger and that are in, you know, still at Bowdoin, thinking about when you get out, you know, make sure you're always centering yourself, as everyone has said, being selfish, opportunistic, all of those things, and looking at those things as a positive instead of a negative connotation.
Emily, what was your major at Bowdoin?
Oh, May and I have the same. I was a government and French major. So I feel like mine were I always thought I would be a lawyer. So I didn't really, I didn't go off the rails in terms of that. The only thing is I wanted to pursue French a bit more than I did. I studied abroad actually when I was in law school. And I thought maybe I studied abroad at the University of Strasbourg. And so I actually thought that I may end up working for the Conseil d'Europe as a lawyer or as something, but it didn't happen that way, and that was fine. But I think that was the only part of my life where my Bowdoin major was something that I thought maybe would happen and it didn't, because otherwise the government and legal studies, in a lot of ways, I feel like very much prepared me for law school.
Thanks so much for that. So I want to, one of the other striking things about the conversation, and this is a term that you brought up, Emily, but that we've touched on in a variety of ways, is this idea of the imposter syndrome, and the way all of you kind of both felt that and overcame it and sort of resisted it at the same time. And I thought one of the other things that was compelling about the way you talked about it was that it's almost as though one might think of it as a gendered term. That is, that one would feel it as a woman, perhaps, in particular eras or in particular contexts, and how in resisting that, one almost changes the very terms of what it means to be qualified for doing something. And I wondered if you wanted to say any more about that, especially as you're thinking about, I mean, in many ways you have addressed it, but to me, it's such a striking idea that one changes the very terms of that concept by changing the notion of being qualified for anything that you want to do.
Mm-hmm. And I guess when you're thinking about what qualified means, it means what are you aiming for? And so, if your goal is to be really good at what you do and sort of focus on that and be a subject matter expert, then I don't think there's anything wrong with that, obviously. And I think that makes sense. But if you're thinking about being qualified in terms of being able to lead people, as you said, it becomes an entirely different conversation. And oftentimes for women, what happens is we are great at what we do, but for some reason that doesn't translate into being qualified as a leader, which seems very odd. However, over time, I've realized that there's some truth to that. Being good at what you do isn't the same as being a good leader. Leading is a whole separate type of exercise and a different type of muscle that I'm still learning every single day. Okay, I probably shouldn't have done that, or was that the right decision? Is that how to get people motivated? Maybe not. And so it is really interesting to think about how people discuss leadership, because what I often find is a lot of the men that I work with were at some time good at what they did, but I don't know if they're particularly good leaders. And to be honest, I don't know if they even focus on what it is to be a good leader. It's always women that I find going into their offices, seeing all of these books and all of this literature on how to lead people, how to motivate a team, whereas men seem to be doing something that feels innate to them. And I think Laurie may have touched on this. I'd like for it to be sort of more innate for women to just view themselves as able to lead for the variety of qualities and attributes that they bring to the table. And oftentimes, I think those can be different than what men bring to the table. And I often think those look different and sometimes are not looked at as positively. But things like empathy, intuition, emotional intelligence, those are, and I'm not saying that that's all women have. I'm just saying that oftentimes women have these sort of innate abilities that men don't always have, and they're not viewed as all that valuable, when in fact, those things are so key. I mean, when I'm leading a group, when we're trying to accomplish something, when you're doing a cross-functional project and you have to bring a lot of people together to do something, it's all about understanding what people's wants are, understanding what their triggers are so that you can make things happen. And so I hope that we as women can start to see ourselves as more innately leaders, just based on the fact that, we do have these amazing attributes oftentimes that men do not have at the same level.
Marilyn, if I could expand on that, having been in the business for as long as I have, but I two examples in the investment banking world. Try to distinguish yourself from the many others, including the other investment banks who are trying to sell exactly what your company can do. Maybe we could do it better in a few areas. The ability to create personal relationships, women have never really capitalized on that. They tend to almost apologize for it because there is, to your list of qualifications, Emily, that you just went through, starting with empathy and going to intuition. I found that those skill sets actually set me apart. So if you're out to dinner and you're trying to create a new business opportunity and a bond, you bond a lot more a lot faster, but also a lot longer term on a personal level if you get to know them and they understand that side of you. So you have to show up. You have to have all the skill sets. You have to be as good or better than your competition. But it's those extra qualities that I know a lot of women do have, and they do lead differently. But that is an example of succeeding and capitalizing on those as opposed to apologizing for them or keeping them down below so no one can see them. Wrong. It's exactly the opposite. And number two, I mean, I truly remember when we were forming this the public company, and I had all the confidence in the world we could finance this in spite of the fact that it was a single family disaster in 08, 9, and 10. And I've never been so humbled as to go out and all the people that I'd raised all the money from over the years, and we're talking billions, and they thought it was laughable that we were going to try to do this in scale. How do you find them? How do you renovate them? How do you lease them? How do you manage them? And how do you create a whole system to run them? That kind of humbling moment will never be lost on me. But what happened is, in terms of taking over finance and operations, it was the people skills and the empathy, and most of the people that were running them were women, and they did an exceptional job. And it's not it's not pro or con either gender. It's capitalizing on the skill sets that I think women do have, and they are different. And I think it's do not ever short those as you move forward as a leader.
Marilyn, may I add to this?
Please.
So imposter syndrome is real. I wrote many chapters on this in my recent book, and I still have it till this day. I think it's sort of innate in us, and it takes a lot of time and patience to kind of overcome that. And what's helping me more now is that more recently, my colleague, who's a renowned scientist, inventor of many, many technologies, also told me he has imposter syndrome. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, let's have wine and discuss this. How do we overcome this? I think it just takes time for us to kind of, weed out all the noise and just focus on our abilities and focus on what we can do and what we can contribute rather than everything else. There will always be people saying, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, but we know what we can do. And I think I can give a prescription to a young grad saying, this is what you need to do to not have imposter syndrome. I can't. I think it's over time and through experience that we kind of overcome that ourselves. But it is a real thing. It's going to happen. And I don't have a solution to get rid of it, unfortunately. So I still have it in some ways.
Raquel, go, please. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. This is a little different, but I think related in little pieces of what people have been talking about, and like recognizing your innate skills to, in a sense, be people oriented. And I think something that Laurie and I chatted about in preparation for this is, what does it look like when you go from a career like nonprofit, like politics, something that you think is going to change the world, and you have to shift your mindset and accept and be open-minded to do something that's a little more corporate, maybe private, maybe finance, and how do you really grapple with that internally? And personally, that was very difficult for me. I thought, this is it. I'm in politics. I organize. I get Dem blue people elected. We fight for abortion. This was it. I felt like my calling. And that was really difficult to kind of wrap my head around leaving potentially. And I'm like, what does that mean for me and my morals? And is it okay that I want to kind of take a step back from something that is so community oriented? Because I think that's really the overarching theme of what we've been saying, that we care about people, we are empathetic, we strive to have good work environments. And I think for me, I had to, again, this is just going back to the selfish thing, but accept the fact that I needed to see myself in a broader lens. Why can't I be, one of the first 10 employees and help scale a company? Why can't I be in this position? Why do I only see myself as a server of society? And how does that limit and really narrow, in a sense, my goals and what I want to achieve? And I think we're so used, I was the leader of water polo, I was the leader of lasso, I did tour guide, I did all these things that were awesome and allowed me to make a lot of connections at Bowdoin. But I think when it came to a time where I really had to pivot, I had to think about, why have I always been wanting to serve, and how can I change that? And how does my new role or potential new opportunities also serve a different community in a way that makes me really excited? And I just wanted to speak to that, because I think a lot of young women, they're like, I'm going to change the world, and we can together in these conversations, and we can help future young professionals, but it's also just like really broadening that lens.
So we're coming to the end, which is unbelievable. It was wonderful to hear you all. You end on that note there of adaptability, and that you've all spoken to so well. I thought your word assimilation, Emily, with respect to adaptability, was also terrific, and the discussion has been shot through with these connections, and also the word compatibility. One of the questions in the Q&A had to do with how do you define success? And I think you've all done it pretty amazingly during the course of our conversation, define success, and how Bowdoin might have contributed to that. But now, at this moment, it's actually my pleasure to introduce Bowdoin's 15th president, Clayton Rose.
Thanks, Marilyn, very much. Thank you all for what was an amazing discussion, which could have, and I hope will, in the future, go on for much longer. I'm really honored and privileged to be asked to offer a few words at the end of this part of celebrating women at Bowdoin in 50 years. And I want to do a couple of things. I want to step back from the specific panel discussion and first offer thanks. Thank you, Marilyn, for having just said that. Thank you for moderating this panel. And thank you to our participants for doing that. But to all the participants over the last 2 days in all of the sessions, the speakers, the performers, everyone who was engaged, everyone who beamed in, to the host committee, 100+ alumni of the college who were, and then the staff members as well, who put this all together and put what will come, and I'll come back to that in a minute, together as well. And especially to the co-chairs, the 7 women who have really been driving this with their drive and compassion, passion, collaboration, good humor, incredible effort over the last many, many months to make all this happen. And I just want to call them out, but Callie and Cheryl, Linda, Alexa, Jenny, Zuli, and Praise, thank you all on behalf of all of us, on behalf of the college, for this amazing work at this really, really important moment, as Marilyn. I've been asked if I'd share a couple of personal reflections on the sessions over the last 2 days, and I'll offer 3. One relates to actually the remarks I made at Convocation several weeks ago, which I directed very specifically to our new first-year students. And it touched on this idea of the best 4 years of your life. And I worry that the way that our students, and particularly as they enter college and enter Bowdoin with that as being one of the touchstones for us, internalize this in a way that may not be completely healthy. And I wanted to try to reorient them a little bit, because college is not perfect every day. Bowdoin is not a perfect institution, first of all. And college is not easy every day. It's not fun every day. There are challenges, there are obstacles, there's heartbreak, there's failure that comes up. All of you have talked about that. All of the sessions over the last several days have talked about that. But it is an amazing community that is incredibly supportive, the students supportive of one another, the alumni supportive of one another and of our students, our faculty, our staff. It makes it a very special and a transformative place. And one that, as Laurie touched on, is a set of lifelong relationships, not ones that end at graduation. The 4 years that you spend at the college, notwithstanding the challenges, are incredibly powerful, are transformative. are lasting and are really important. And each of the participants in all of the sessions that we've had have given voice to this and testimony to the fact that while imperfect and challenging, these are among the best 4 years of your life. And that idea is one that extends throughout your life as well. It's a metaphor in some ways for how we think about the relationship with Bowdoin. The second is one I just wanted to pick up on something that Emily said, and all of you were touching on it as well, about adaptability. One of the challenges that we continue to have had, and we continue to have, and I suspect will be for some time, is how Bowdoin is a place that where every single person feels that it is their community. I resist using the word home because home is very different and very special, but their community, and that it is not a straight white Christian male community into which you are invited, but it is everyone's community. And we've made good progress on that, but we have a lot more work to do about that. And I wanted to take this moment to acknowledge that as well. The last is just to also acknowledge and to say out loud that, as you know, I've sat in the back of the virtual room here. I once again, you know, over the course of the last 2 days, every single person who's spoken has reinforced the notion of the character, the integrity, the passion, the compassion, the accomplishments, the drive, the creativity that are embedded in each and every one of you, and that speak volumes about women at Bowdoin, past, present, and future. It's remarkable to behold and to imagine how much more powerful the educational experience, how much greater the 4 years, metaphorical 4 years, will be as we continue to move ahead here. I also want to just acknowledge that this is not the end of our celebration, our examination, our engagement of women, 50 years of women at Bowdoin. This is the beginning. There's more programming, an opportunity to come together, to talk, to help us understand how we can do what we do better and to make the college better. Some of that, I hope a lot of it, will be in person, where we will all be together, where you will all be together. I'm heartbroken that we couldn't do it now, but everyone understands the reasons for that. And finally, just to thank all of you for everything you do for the college and for truly for the women of Bowdoin who make Bowdoin better. So thank you.